Maria Santos had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her grandfather polish his World War II medals every Sunday after church, listening to his stories of brotherhood and honor on the high seas. At 18, with her high school diploma fresh in hand and college tuition beyond her family's reach, Maria walked into the Navy recruitment office with stars in her eyes and determination in her heart. The recruiter, a polished petty officer with practiced charm, painted pictures of adventure and opportunity. "The Navy will make you strong," he promised, sliding glossy brochures across his desk. "You'll see the world, learn valuable skills, and serve something bigger than yourself." Maria signed her name with confidence, believing she was stepping into a family that would protect and nurture her growth. Boot camp at Naval Station Great Lakes tested every limit Maria thought she had. The physical demands pushed her body to exhaustion, while drill instructors broke down her civilian mindset to rebuild her as a sailor. She excelled despite the challenges, earning respect from fellow recruits and recognition from her superiors. Her natural leadership abilities and technical aptitude caught the attention of her commanding officers, who recommended her for advanced electronics training. After graduation, Maria received orders to Naval Air Station Pensacola for specialized radar systems training. The base buzzed with activity as future naval aviators learned to fly, while technical specialists like Maria mastered the complex systems that would keep them safe. She threw herself into her studies, determined to prove that a young woman from rural Texas could master technology as well as any male counterpart. The training environment initially felt professional and supportive. Maria's instructors recognized her quick grasp of complex concepts and her ability to troubleshoot problems that stumped other students. She formed friendships with fellow trainees, both male and female, finding camaraderie in their shared struggles to master difficult material under pressure. Evening study groups in the barracks became social gatherings where young sailors bonded over shared experiences and dreams for their naval careers. However, subtle signs began to emerge that not everyone welcomed Maria's presence or success. Some male instructors made comments about women not belonging in technical fields, disguised as jokes but carrying an undercurrent of genuine resentment. When Maria scored higher than male counterparts on difficult exams, she noticed cooler treatment from certain staff members and fewer opportunities to demonstrate her skills on advanced equipment. One particular instructor, Chief Petty Officer Bradley Morrison, seemed especially threatened by Maria's competence. A 20-year veteran with a reputation for being tough but fair, Morrison began finding fault with Maria's work despite her consistent high performance. He would assign her additional duties while excusing male students from similar tasks, claiming she needed extra seasoning to meet naval standards. The harassment escalated gradually, becoming more personal and aggressive. Morrison would stand uncomfortably close while reviewing her work, making inappropriate comments about her appearance and questioning whether she could handle the stress of shipboard life. When Maria reported these incidents to her section leader, she was told that Morrison was simply maintaining high standards and that she should focus on proving herself worthy of naval training. Other female sailors quietly shared their own experiences of similar treatment, revealing a pattern of behavior that extended beyond Maria's individual situation. They spoke in whispers during off-duty hours, afraid to make formal complaints that might damage their careers before they truly began. The message was clear: endure the harassment, keep quiet, and hope to outlast the problematic instructors. Maria's performance never wavered despite the hostile environment. She completed her training with honors, earning certification on multiple radar systems and receiving commendation for her technical expertise. Her official records reflected excellence, while the unofficial reality included incidents that would never appear in any Navy documentation. Upon completion of training, Maria received orders to USS Constellation, an aircraft carrier preparing for deployment to the Persian Gulf. The ship represented everything she had dreamed about since childhood: a chance to serve on the front lines, using her skills to protect American interests and support naval aviation operations. She packed her sea bag with excitement, believing that shipboard life would offer the professional environment and mutual respect that had been lacking during her shore training. The Constellation was an impressive sight as Maria first approached the pier in San Diego. The massive vessel stretched over 1,000 feet, its flight deck busy with aircraft and personnel preparing for the upcoming deployment. The ship housed over 5,000 sailors and Marines, creating a floating city with its own complex social dynamics and unwritten rules. Maria's assignment to the radar division placed her in one of the ship's most critical departments. The sophisticated systems she had trained to operate would track aircraft movements, detect potential threats, and coordinate with other ships in the battle group. The responsibility was exactly what she had hoped for: meaningful work that would directly contribute to mission success and crew safety. Her division chief, Senior Chief Electronics Technician Robert Hayes, initially seemed supportive of Maria's integration into the department. He reviewed her training records with approval, noting her high scores and instructor recommendations. However, his demeanor changed noticeably once the ship left port and began its journey toward the deployment area. Life aboard ship proved more challenging than Maria had anticipated. The cramped living quarters, constant noise, and lack of privacy created stress for everyone, but women faced additional challenges in the male-dominated environment. The ship's female berthing areas were overcrowded, with too few bathroom facilities and inadequate ventilation that made sleep difficult during hot weather operations. More troubling were the unwritten rules that seemed to govern female sailors' behavior aboard ship. They were expected to avoid certain areas during specific times, dress and act in ways that wouldn't provoke male crew members, and accept limitations on their duties that weren't officially mandated by Navy policy. Female sailors who violated these unofficial expectations faced retaliation ranging from social ostracism to more serious professional consequences. Maria discovered that her technical expertise meant little in an environment where gender often determined treatment and opportunities. Male sailors with less training and experience received preferred assignments while she was relegated to routine maintenance tasks that didn't utilize her specialized skills. When she questioned these decisions, her supervisors suggested she wasn't ready for more responsibility and needed to prove herself worthy of challenging assignments. The ship's command structure seemed deliberately blind to the gender-based discrimination occurring throughout the vessel. Female sailors who complained about unequal treatment were labeled as troublemakers or told they needed to develop thicker skin for naval service. Meanwhile, male sailors who harassed or discriminated against women faced minimal consequences, if any disciplinary action occurred at all. 3 months into the deployment, Maria witnessed an incident that would change her perception of naval service forever. During a port call in Bahrain, several male sailors from her division returned to the ship intoxicated and aggressive. They cornered a junior female sailor in a passageway, making crude sexual comments and physically intimidating her despite her obvious distress and repeated requests to be left alone. Maria intervened, using her higher rank and forceful personality to disperse the group and escort the younger woman to safety. However, when she reported the incident through proper channels, the response was swift and concerning. Rather than investigating the harassment, ship's leadership questioned Maria's judgment and suggested she had misunderstood a harmless interaction between shipmates. The junior sailor, frightened by potential retaliation, refused to provide a statement supporting Maria's account. Without corroborating testimony, the investigation was closed with no disciplinary action against the male sailors involved. Maria learned that she was now considered a troublemaker who couldn't handle normal shipboard interactions without creating drama that disrupted unit cohesion. From that point forward, Maria's life aboard ship became increasingly difficult. Her work assignments became more menial, her leave requests were frequently denied, and her performance evaluations began reflecting problems that hadn't existed before she reported the harassment incident. Fellow female sailors offered sympathy but couldn't provide support without risking their own careers. The isolation and stress began affecting Maria's physical and mental health. She developed severe headaches and stomach problems that the ship's medical department attributed to deployment stress. Sleep became elusive as she remained constantly alert for potential threats from crew members who now viewed her as an enemy rather than a shipmate. Despite the hostile environment, Maria continued performing her duties with the same dedication and skill that had marked her training. She refused to let harassment and discrimination compromise her professional standards, even as the personal cost mounted daily. Her commitment to serving her country remained strong, but her faith in the Navy's commitment to protecting all sailors had been shattered by harsh reality. As the deployment continued, Maria began documenting incidents and gathering evidence of the systematic discrimination and harassment that female sailors faced aboard ship. She realized that her individual situation was part of a larger pattern that extended throughout the naval service, protected by institutional indifference and active cover-ups by leadership who prioritized unit reputation over sailor welfare. The seeds of Maria's eventual confrontation with Navy leadership were planted during those dark months at sea, when she learned that the values of honor, courage, and commitment that had attracted her to naval service were often abandoned when protecting those values became inconvenient for maintaining the status quo. The deployment's 7th month brought an incident that would forever alter Maria's naval career and, ultimately expose a web of institutional cover-ups that reached the highest levels of naval command. During a routine maintenance evolution in the ship's electronic spaces, Senior Chief Hayes cornered Maria alone in a remote equipment room where surveillance cameras had conveniently malfunctioned weeks earlier. What began as aggressive verbal harassment quickly escalated to physical assault as Hayes pinned Maria against an equipment rack, his intentions unmistakably clear. Maria fought back with every ounce of strength and training she possessed, managing to break free and escape the compartment, but not before Hayes had torn her uniform and left physical evidence of his attack. Racing to her berthing area, Maria's mind reeled with shock and rage. Her fellow female sailors immediately recognized what had happened, having seen similar incidents throughout their naval careers. They urged her to report the assault immediately, despite knowing the likely consequences for everyone involved. Maria's hands shook as she knocked on her division officer's stateroom door. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, one of the few female officers in the engineering department, listened to Maria's account with growing concern and anger. Martinez had suspected Hayes of inappropriate behavior toward female subordinates but had never received formal complaints that would allow her to take action. The formal investigation that followed revealed the depth of corruption and conspiracy within the ship's command structure. Hayes had a documented history of sexual harassment and assault spanning 15 years of naval service, with complaints filed and subsequently buried by commanding officers who prioritized his technical expertise and leadership experience over the safety of female sailors under his supervision. Previous victims had been transferred off the ship, received poor performance evaluations that damaged their careers, or were pressured to leave naval service entirely rather than pursue justice through military courts. A pattern emerged of institutional protection for predatory behavior when the perpetrators were considered valuable to mission accomplishment. During the investigation, Maria discovered that her own personnel file had been altered to remove commendatory entries and insert negative comments that painted her as a problem sailor. Her training records showed artificially lowered scores, and her supervisor evaluations contained fabricated incidents that questioned her competence and reliability. The conspiracy extended beyond Hayes to include multiple senior enlisted personnel and junior officers who had participated in covering up previous incidents or retaliating against sailors who reported misconduct. Some participated willingly to protect their own advancement, while others were coerced through threats to their careers or promises of future assignments. The ship's commanding officer, Captain Thomas Richardson, initially attempted to minimize the investigation's scope and pressure Maria to accept non-judicial punishment for Hayes rather than pursuing court-martial proceedings. Richardson argued that criminal charges would damage the ship's reputation and affect crew morale during ongoing combat operations in support of Middle Eastern conflicts. When Maria refused to accept an administrative resolution, Richardson began a campaign of intimidation designed to force her compliance. Her liberty was restricted, her work assignments became deliberately dangerous, and her berthing arrangements were changed to isolate her from supportive shipmates. The message was clear: cooperate with the cover-up or face consequences that would destroy her naval career. Maria's family began receiving anonymous phone calls warning them that their daughter was causing trouble that would result in serious consequences for everyone involved. Her younger brother, still in high school, was approached by recruiters who suggested that Maria's behavior might affect his own eligibility for military service. The psychological pressure intensified as investigation proceedings dragged on for months without resolution. Maria was transferred to different departments aboard ship, allegedly for her protection, but actually to isolate her from potential witnesses and evidence that might support her case. Each transfer came with new supervisors who had been briefed about her troublemaker status and treated her accordingly. Fellow female sailors who might have provided supporting testimony were reassigned to other ships or shore stations, officially for normal rotation purposes but actually to prevent their participation in ongoing legal proceedings. Those who remained were warned about the career consequences of involving themselves in controversial cases that challenged ship leadership. The ship's medical department became part of the cover-up apparatus when Maria sought treatment for physical injuries and psychological trauma resulting from the assault. Her medical records were altered to suggest pre-existing conditions rather than assault-related injuries, and she was prescribed medications that would impair her ability to perform duties and potentially affect her credibility during legal proceedings. Maria's request for transfer to shore duty pending resolution of the case was denied repeatedly, forcing her to remain in the hostile environment where she faced daily retaliation from Hayes' supporters and ongoing pressure to drop her charges. The isolation and stress began affecting her physical health as she developed severe insomnia, panic attacks, and digestive problems that the ship's medical staff attributed to deployment stress rather than traumatic assault. During a port call in Dubai, Maria made contact with a Navy chaplain who was not part of the ship's company and, therefore, outside the conspiracy protecting Hayes. Chaplain Robert Torres listened to her account with growing horror, recognizing patterns he had seen at other commands where sexual assault victims were systematically silenced through official and unofficial retaliation. Torres helped Maria contact external support organizations that specialized in military sexual assault cases, including lawyers with experience navigating the military justice system and advocates who could provide guidance on protecting her rights during ongoing proceedings. These contacts proved crucial as the internal investigation continued to stall and pressure for an administrative resolution intensified. The turning point came when Maria discovered that Hayes had assault charges pending from his previous assignment, charges that had been dropped when he transferred to the Constellation under circumstances that suggested command involvement in covering up his criminal behavior. The pattern of protection and concealment extended across multiple commands and involved senior officers who were responsible for reviewing and approving his continued service. Armed with evidence of the broader conspiracy, Maria's case attracted attention from congressional representatives who specialized in military affairs and had been investigating patterns of sexual assault cover-ups throughout the armed services. Their involvement brought scrutiny that ship and fleet commanders could no longer ignore or deflect through normal administrative channels. The investigation expanded to include other ships in the battle group where similar patterns of harassment and cover-ups had occurred. Female sailors who had been silenced or transferred began coming forward with their own accounts of assault and institutional retaliation, creating a body of evidence that could not be dismissed or explained away through isolated incident reports. Hayes' supporters within the ship's command structure began distancing themselves as the investigation's scope expanded and external oversight intensified. Some provided evidence against Hayes in exchange for immunity from prosecution, while others found themselves under investigation for their own roles in the cover-up conspiracy. The deployment's final months were marked by increasing tension as the investigation continued and crew members chose sides based on their beliefs about accountability versus unit cohesion. Some sailors supported Maria's courage in challenging the system, while others blamed her for bringing unwanted attention that they believed damaged the ship's reputation and morale. Maria's determination to pursue justice despite overwhelming pressure and personal cost inspired other female sailors to report their own experiences of harassment and assault. Their collective courage began breaking down the wall of silence that had protected predatory behavior throughout the naval service for decades. The legal proceedings revealed the extent to which senior naval leadership had been aware of systemic problems with sexual assault and harassment but had prioritized institutional reputation over sailor safety and welfare. Internal communication showed deliberate decisions to transfer problem personnel rather than prosecute them, creating a cycle where predators continued their behavior at new commands. As the ship prepared to return to port, Maria faced an uncertain future within an organization that had failed to protect her and had actively worked to silence her pursuit of justice. However, her courage in confronting the system had set in motion changes that would affect military justice procedures and accountability measures for years to come. The case attracted media attention that brought public scrutiny to military sexual assault policies and procedures, forcing congressional hearings and legislative changes designed to protect victims and ensure proper investigation and prosecution of sexual assault cases throughout the armed services. Maria's personal sacrifice had exposed institutional failures that extended far beyond her individual case, revealing a culture of impunity that had allowed sexual predators to continue their behavior with minimal consequences while victims faced retaliation and career destruction for reporting crimes committed against them. The battle for justice was far from over as the ship returned to port, but Maria's courage had begun a process of accountability and reform that would ultimately change how the military addressed sexual assault and protected victims who chose to pursue justice despite personal and professional risks. The USS Constellation's return to San Diego marked the beginning of a new phase in Maria's fight for justice, as her case moved from shipboard investigation to formal court-martial proceedings that would test the military justice system's commitment to accountability and reform. The homecoming that should have been celebratory became another battlefield where institutional power clashed with individual courage. Upon arrival at Naval Base San Diego, Maria was immediately transferred to a shore-based command while awaiting trial proceedings. The Temporary Personnel Support Detachment housed sailors in legal or administrative limbo, creating an environment where those who challenged the system found themselves isolated from normal naval community and support structures. Her new temporary quarters were Spartan and isolating, designed more for punishment than rehabilitation. Fellow residents included sailors facing disciplinary action, medical evaluation, or administrative separation, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and apprehension that affected everyone's mental health and motivation to continue their naval careers. The base's legal office assigned Maria a junior legal officer with minimal experience in sexual assault cases and little understanding of the complex institutional dynamics she had uncovered. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh was well-intentioned but overwhelmed by the scope of evidence and the powerful opposition arrayed against her client's pursuit of justice. Maria quickly realized that she would need experienced civilian legal representation to navigate the military justice system effectively. The lawyers recommended by advocacy organizations specialized in military sexual assault cases and understood the institutional barriers that victims faced when challenging senior personnel and established command structures. Her civilian attorney, Amanda Richardson, had spent 15 years representing military sexual assault victims and had seen every tactic used by commands to protect perpetrators and silence victims. Richardson's experience proved invaluable as the case moved through preliminary hearings and pre-trial motions that would determine how much evidence could be presented and which witnesses would be allowed to testify. The Navy's prosecution team was led by experienced military lawyers who appeared committed to pursuing justice, but their superiors made it clear that the case should be resolved quickly and quietly to minimize negative publicity for the service. This tension between justice and institutional reputation would characterize the entire proceedings. Pre-trial discovery revealed the extensive documentation that Maria had compiled during the deployment, including detailed incident reports, witness statements, and photographic evidence of the institutional retaliation she had faced. However, much of the most damaging evidence had been classified or declared privileged communication that could not be used in court proceedings. The defense team representing Hayes employed a strategy designed to discredit Maria's character and question her motives for reporting the assault. They portrayed her as an ambitious sailor who fabricated accusations when her career advancement was blocked by legitimate performance concerns rather than gender discrimination. Private investigators hired by the defense team began contacting Maria's family members, former classmates, and previous supervisors seeking any information that could be used to undermine her credibility. Her parents received visits from men who claimed to be journalists but asked questions that suggested they were working for Hayes's legal team. The pressure extended to other female sailors who might testify about the hostile environment aboard the Constellation or Hayes's pattern of inappropriate behavior toward subordinates. Several received new orders to remote assignments that would prevent their participation in trial proceedings, while others faced subtle threats about the career consequences of testifying against senior enlisted personnel. Maria's own mental health deteriorated under the stress of ongoing legal proceedings and institutional retaliation. The base medical facility prescribed anti-anxiety medications that helped with panic attacks but left her feeling disconnected from the fight for justice that had become her primary mission since the assault. Sleep remained elusive as she relived the assault and its aftermath while preparing for testimony that would require her to describe intimate details of the attack in front of military officers who might be more concerned with protecting the institution than ensuring justice for victims. Her appetite disappeared, leading to significant weight loss that affected her physical strength and energy levels. Support came from unexpected sources as female veterans from previous decades contacted Maria through advocacy organizations to share their own stories of military sexual assault and institutional cover-ups. Their experiences revealed that the problems she had faced were not isolated incidents but part of a decades-long pattern of protecting perpetrators while silencing victims. These women had fought similar battles in earlier eras when even fewer protections existed for assault victims and when challenging senior personnel could result in immediate discharge or criminal charges for false accusations. Their courage in the face of overwhelming opposition inspired Maria to continue her fight despite personal costs. Congressional representatives who had been monitoring the case arranged for Maria to testify before a House Armed Services subcommittee investigating military sexual assault policies and procedures. Her testimony, delivered in a secure setting to protect ongoing legal proceedings, provided lawmakers with detailed evidence of institutional failures and systemic problems. The congressional testimony attracted media attention that brought national scrutiny to the Navy's handling of sexual assault cases and the culture of impunity that allowed predators to continue their behavior with minimal consequences. Major news organizations began investigating similar cases throughout the military services. This public attention created pressure for Navy leadership to demonstrate their commitment to justice and accountability, but it also intensified efforts to discredit Maria and minimize the significance of her case. Senior officers suggested in background interviews with reporters that isolated incidents should not be used to judge the entire naval service. The court-martial proceedings finally began 8 months after the assault, held in a courtroom at Naval Base San Diego under heavy security designed to prevent disruptions from protesters or media representatives. The delay had allowed tensions to build and given both sides time to prepare comprehensive strategies for the high-profile case. Maria's testimony was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, requiring her to describe the assault in explicit detail while being cross-examined by defense attorneys who questioned every aspect of her account and challenged her motivations for reporting the crime. The experience was traumatic and degrading, despite efforts by military lawyers to protect her from inappropriate questioning. Supporting witnesses included fellow female sailors who testified about the hostile environment aboard ship and Hayes's pattern of inappropriate behavior toward subordinates. However, many potential witnesses had been transferred or were unable to testify due to classification concerns about operational security. The defense presented character witnesses who praised Hayes's technical expertise and leadership abilities while suggesting that Maria had fabricated her accusations to explain poor performance evaluations and career setbacks. They argued that consensual sexual encounters had been recharacterized as assault when Maria faced professional consequences. Medical evidence supported Maria's account of the assault, including photographs of injuries and contemporary medical records that documented her physical and psychological trauma. However, the defense argued that these injuries could have resulted from normal shipboard activities or training exercises rather than sexual assault. The trial revealed the extent of institutional knowledge about Hayes's problematic behavior and the deliberate decisions by senior officers to protect him rather than investigate complaints from female subordinates. Internal communication showed awareness of his reputation and concerns about allowing him unsupervised access to female sailors. Testimony from the ship's commanding officer proved particularly damaging to the Navy's case as Captain Richardson acknowledged under oath that he had been aware of Hayes's reputation but had failed to take preventive measures or investigate previous complaints. His admission contradicted earlier statements that portrayed Hayes as an exemplary sailor without known behavioral problems. The court-martial board, composed of senior military officers, heard testimony over 3 weeks that exposed systemic failures in sexual assault prevention, investigation, and victim protection. The evidence painted a picture of institutional indifference to victim welfare and active participation in covering up criminal behavior. During closing arguments, the prosecution argued that Hayes's conviction was necessary to demonstrate the Navy's commitment to justice and accountability, while the defense maintained that the case was based on false accusations designed to explain Maria's career failures and seek revenge against a demanding supervisor. The verdict, when it came after 2 days of deliberation, would determine not only Hayes's fate but also whether the military justice system could provide accountability for sexual assault and protection for victims who chose to pursue justice despite institutional pressure and personal costs. Maria waited in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, surrounded by her legal team and victim advocates who had supported her throughout the lengthy proceedings. The outcome would determine whether her sacrifice had achieved justice or whether the institutional forces protecting perpetrators remained too powerful to challenge successfully. The court-martial board returned with a verdict that would reverberate throughout the naval service and beyond. Senior Chief Hayes was found guilty of sexual assault and conspiracy to obstruct justice, receiving a sentence of 8 years confinement, reduction to the lowest enlisted rank, and dishonorable discharge from naval service. The conviction marked the first time in decades that a senior enlisted sailor had faced serious consequences for sexual assault against a subordinate. However, the victory came with devastating personal costs for Maria that would extend far beyond the courtroom. The trial's conclusion did not end the institutional retaliation that had begun with her initial report, and the Navy's promises of protection for victims proved largely hollow when faced with entrenched resistance to accountability and change. Within days of the verdict, Maria received orders to a remote communications station in Alaska, officially described as a normal rotation but clearly designed to isolate her from media attention and advocacy organizations that had supported her case. The assignment would separate her from legal and emotional support networks while placing her under the supervision of personnel who viewed her as a troublemaker who had damaged naval reputation. Her performance evaluations, written after the trial's conclusion, continued to reflect artificially poor ratings that would prevent promotion and limit her career options within the naval service. Senior officers who had testified about institutional failures faced no disciplinary action, while Maria's career prospects were systematically destroyed through administrative channels that left few options for appeal or recourse. The isolation and ongoing retaliation took a severe toll on Maria's physical and mental health. Her previously excellent service record was now marked by medical issues including chronic insomnia, anxiety disorders, and digestive problems that naval medical personnel attributed to personal rather than institutional factors. Treatment was minimal and focused on medication rather than addressing the underlying trauma and stress. Fellow sailors at her new assignment had been briefed about her case in ways that portrayed her as a problem individual rather than a crime victim who had courageously pursued justice. The culture of victim blaming and institutional protection remained intact despite the high-profile conviction and promises of reform from senior leadership. Maria's family relationships suffered under the stress of ongoing legal battles and media attention that continued long after the trial's conclusion. Her parents faced harassment from Hayes supporters and struggled to understand how their daughter's military service had resulted in such devastating personal consequences despite her obvious courage and integrity. The physical evidence of her ordeal extended beyond psychological trauma to include permanent scarring from the assault that served as daily reminders of the attack and its aftermath. These scars would later become central to her decision to expose the full extent of her suffering and the Navy's failure to provide adequate protection and support. 2 years after the trial, Maria made the difficult decision to leave naval service through administrative channels that would allow her to maintain veteran status and access to benefits. The decision represented both defeat and liberation, ending a career that had begun with such promise but had been destroyed by institutional indifference to victim welfare. The transition to civilian life proved extremely challenging as Maria struggled with unemployment, relationship difficulties, and ongoing medical issues related to her military trauma. Veteran support services were inadequate for addressing the complex needs of military sexual assault survivors, particularly those who had faced extensive institutional retaliation. Employment proved difficult as background checks revealed the controversial nature of her naval service, with potential employers concerned about hiring someone who had challenged military authority and attracted negative attention from former supervisors. Her specialized technical training seemed irrelevant in a job market that valued conformity over courage. Financial pressures mounted as medical expenses for ongoing treatment exceeded her veteran benefits and part-time employment income. The disability rating process proved lengthy and contentious, with Veterans Affairs personnel questioning whether her medical conditions were truly service-related rather than pre-existing or self-inflicted problems. Maria's decision to speak publicly about her experiences came after years of watching other military sexual assault cases result in similar patterns of victim blaming, institutional protection for perpetrators, and inadequate support for survivors. Despite personal costs, she felt obligated to help other victims understand what they might face when pursuing justice. Her first public appearance was at a veteran advocacy organization's annual conference, where she spoke to an audience of military sexual assault survivors and their supporters about the realities of challenging institutional power structures. The response was overwhelming, with numerous attendees sharing their own experiences of assault and retaliation. The decision to reveal her physical scars came during a congressional hearing where she testified about the long-term consequences of military sexual assault and institutional retaliation. Frustrated by committee members who seemed more concerned with protecting military reputation than addressing victim needs, Maria made the spontaneous decision that would define her public advocacy. In front of television cameras and congressional representatives, Maria lifted her shirt to reveal the permanent scars from Hayes's assault, combined with self-inflicted injuries that had resulted from years of inadequate treatment and support for her trauma. The dramatic moment silenced the hearing room and provided stark visual evidence of the human cost of institutional failures. The image of Maria's scarred torso became a powerful symbol of military sexual assault survivors and the inadequate support they received from both military and veteran systems. The photograph appeared on magazine covers and news broadcasts, forcing uncomfortable conversations about the true cost of military service for women who faced sexual violence from their own colleagues. Congressional response was swift and comprehensive, with new legislation mandating independent investigation of sexual assault cases, enhanced victim protection measures, and accountability standards for commanders who failed to address misconduct within their units. The reforms represented the most significant changes to military justice procedures in decades. However, implementation of these reforms proved inconsistent and often ineffective, as institutional resistance continued to protect established power structures and cultural norms that prioritized unit cohesion over individual justice. Maria's advocacy work expanded to include monitoring compliance with new policies and supporting victims who continued to face retaliation despite legal protections. Her personal healing journey included extensive therapy, advocacy work that provided purpose and meaning, and gradual reconstruction of relationships that had been damaged by years of trauma and institutional battles. The process was slow and often frustrating, but it provided hope for other survivors who felt isolated and defeated by their experiences. Maria's story became part of training curricula at military academies and leadership schools, though her own experience suggested that education alone was insufficient to change deeply entrenched cultural attitudes that tolerated sexual violence and punished those who reported it. Systemic change required sustained pressure and accountability measures that extended beyond policy changes. The Navy's official response to Maria's case included public apologies, policy modifications, and promises of better victim support, but investigations revealed that many of the institutional problems she had exposed remained largely unchanged. Senior officers who had participated in covering up Hayes's behavior faced minimal consequences and continued their careers with little impact on advancement opportunities. Maria's civilian career eventually stabilized as she found employment with advocacy organizations that specialized in military sexual assault prevention and victim support. Her unique perspective as someone who had successfully prosecuted her attacker while experiencing severe institutional retaliation provided valuable insights for policy development and victim services. The long-term impact of Maria's courage extended far beyond her individual case to influence military justice reform, congressional oversight of sexual assault prevention programs, and public awareness of the challenges faced by military sexual assault survivors. Her willingness to sacrifice her career and endure ongoing retaliation helped other victims understand their rights and options. Years later, Maria reflected on her decision to report Hayes's assault and pursue justice through military channels despite overwhelming pressure to remain silent. While the personal costs had been devastating, her actions had contributed to meaningful changes that provided better protection and support for future victims who chose to come forward. The scars she revealed in that congressional hearing room represented more than physical evidence of sexual assault. They symbolized the courage required to challenge institutional power structures that protected perpetrators while abandoning victims. Her story became a testament to the price of speaking truth to power and the importance of supporting those who choose justice over convenience. Maria's legacy lies not only in the conviction of her attacker or the policy changes that followed her testimony, but in the inspiration she provided to other survivors who found strength in her example and hope in her eventual triumph over institutional indifference and personal trauma. Her courage in revealing what the Navy tried to bury helped illuminate truths that could no longer be hidden or ignored.